Well, as EU leaders discuss further arms deliveries, fierce battles are continuing on Ukraine's eastern front around Bakhmut, a city that's become symbolic of this war. But another town in eastern Ukraine has also been resisting fierce attacks by Russian forces attempting to surround it.
The city of Avdiivka may not look like much of a prize in battle. There simply isn't much left of it. But residents say the Russians seem set on battering their city into submission. This eerie silence, a rare lull in fighting.
There are planes, rockets here all the time, every day. See there, too.
A bird's-eye view shows there's barely a town left to occupy. But this isn't stopping Russian fire.
The situation is getting worse and worse. The missiles are getting bigger. Buildings literally collapse.
Western intelligence and Ukrainian commanders say the fighting for Avdiivka is some of the fiercest of the war. Comparisons are being drawn to the embattled city of Bakhmut. Located on the front line in Donetsk province, Avdiivka is another stubborn thorn in the side of Russian troops trying to advance west. Data gathered by the Institute for the Study of War shows the Kremlin's forces have almost surrounded the city, an apparent attempt to cut Avdiivka off from its western supply lines. So far, like Bakhmut, Avdiivka has held out. Ukrainian troops say they're managing to stop Russian forces from breaking through their defense line. But commanders are having to weigh up the use of every shell and bullet.
We are trying to save ammunition as much as we can, in case there's a breakthrough.
The city's fierce defense has earned it a reputation as a second frontline fortress, and locals say Avdiivka has an advantage over Bakhmut. It's been on the front line since the Donbas conflict started in 2014.
There's a very serious fortification line, all armored concrete with bunkers. It's a real fortress. It's protected better than Bakhmut.
Fortress or not, the Ukrainian government has advised Avdiivka's people not to take their chances. A voluntary evacuation effort has emptied the city of most of its 25,000 residents. But some feel they just can't leave.
What about leaving? My sons are in the cemetery. No one needs me anymore.
It's a sentiment shared by others. Local officials say some 2,000 people have chosen to stay in the city they've long called home. With Russian troops pushing to encircle Avdiivka, they face a growing risk of being left to their own devices.
Well, Marina Myron is a defence analyst and honorary research fellow at King's College London. She joins us from Munich. Welcome back to DW. So it's being said that Avdiivka is likely to be the next decisive battle of the Donbas front after Bakhmut. Is that how you see it?
Well, thank you for having me. The Russians have certainly tried to take Avdiivka for a long time now, since the beginning of the special military operation. I think the efforts have been made since March 2022. However, the offensive has never been successful, and the Ukrainian forces are still holding Avdiivka. However, the Russian forces are now trying to integrate the LNR and DNR proxy forces in order to reinforce their attempt to surround the city, because that is from where the Russians are claiming that the Ukrainians are attacking Donetsk. And so it would be important for the Russians to take the city. But what is more important for the Russians is to cause as many casualties for the Ukrainian forces in order to prevent a possible spring counteroffensive.
Right. And so we're hearing reports that the Russian offensive around Bakhmut seems to be losing steam. Why is that likely to be?
Well, we've heard this yesterday from Colonel General Syrsky, who said that it seems that the Russian forces are running out of steam. However, the stress was that Wagner seems still to retain some capabilities. And the city is practically surrounded with the only road via Avdiivka village remaining for supply of the Ukrainian forces. So it seems that the level of activity from the Russian forces has been reduced. However, the idea here is, again, as many Russian commentators also have stressed, is for Russia not to hold the territory or to win over territory, but to destroy the capability of the Ukrainian forces. And it makes sense in a way because Russians don't have enough troops to hold territory. And as Yevgeny Prigozhin from Wagner said, there is a possibility that the Ukrainian forces might strike in the direction of Belgorod or try to break through the line between Svatove and Kremina. So there is this fear, in addition to the fears that the Ukrainian forces might be going towards Zaporizhia and towards Crimea, which is a big red line for the Russians. So all efforts are poured into stopping Ukrainian forces in their tracks, especially considering that Ukraine itself is suffering both from ammunition shortages and from mobilization problems as of January 2023. Right. So the idea is to gain some time.
So let's talk about those ammunition shortages. EU leaders have just agreed this increase in ammunition production and supply to Ukraine. Do you believe that the EU can deliver on this promise? And perhaps you could speculate on what is likely to happen if they don't.
Well, the problem is that it is not easy to deliver the promised amount because unlike the Russian economy that is now functioning in wartime, nobody was prepared for these heavy artillery battles. And so we're faced with this problem to have to produce and deliver the ammunition. We know that several ammunition lines have been set up in Ukraine in January 23 to make sure that Ukrainian forces at least have some ammunition. However, getting the right ammunition, like 125 millimeters, will take time. And this is essential for the Ukrainian armed forces, for them to gain some parity in terms of artillery. So the time here is very critical. And we also see political sentiments, not only in the US, but also from Germany and France about the possibility of this becoming protracted war. So the European allies, with exception of the Baltic states, Poland and Slovakia, are losing face in the Ukrainian counteroffensive.
Right. Thank you so much for outlining that for us, Marina Myron from King's College London.
Thank you.
And I'm joined live by Achille Dupre, spokesperson for the International Committee of the Red Cross. He's just returned to Kyiv from Ukraine's front lines, where his organization is providing humanitarian aid. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. We talk a lot here about developments on the battlefield, but I want to know what the situation is like for civilians in Ukrainian towns that are under siege or close to coming under siege.
I think the images that you just shown and the stories of people that you have just shared speak for themselves. And this is the same stories that I have heard only a few days ago when I was near these localities on the front line. I was in Selidove, that's 40 kilometers from Avdiivka, and I was in all other localities that are close to Bakhmut. The image that we're seeing is an image of destruction, and it's hard to imagine that civilians remain in these areas, yet several thousands of them are surviving in these terrible conditions. One man named Nikolai, I met in a nearby village close to Bakhmut, told me, we are not living here, we are merely surviving. And that's really what I could feel when speaking to people there, to civilians there. And just the amount of destruction, the fact that villages have been destroyed, buildings are destroyed, schools, homes are destroyed, it's just shocking.
And during this interview, we are looking at some of the footage that your organization has provided to DW. With so many people having fled frontline areas, we just saw in that last footage a glimpse of some of the people who have chosen to stay behind. Who are they and why are they staying?
It's a lot of people are elderly. We also see people who are low mobility, people with disabilities, but also some younger people who simply refuse to leave older family members behind, and people who simply refuse to leave what they have called their homes for their entire lives. So I spoke, for example, to a young man named Daniel, a 19-year-old man, and he told me he doesn't want to leave because his grandfather lives in this town and he doesn't want to leave him. So all these people who are remaining, they're lacking the essentials. They're lacking water, they're lacking food, they're lacking hygiene items. So whatever aid we can bring in makes their lives possible under such difficult conditions.
So it really is some of society's most vulnerable facing these conditions. How difficult is it for you to reach these areas with aid they need?
It's quite difficult and long. The roads are not really good. Also, there are many military checkpoints. It's heavily militarized areas. And of course, when you see such amount of destructions in the cities, you can imagine that it's a dangerous place. When we are offloading I was myself on a convoy that delivered 17 tons of food to a locality near Avdiivka. When we were offloading the trucks, we hear in the background constant explosions, exchange of artillery. So it's not easy to reach these places. Nevertheless, we know that civilians are there, and it's our humanitarian duty to provide them with the assistance that they need to survive.
Thank you so much for that update. I also want to ask you about the situation of pro-Russian civilians in areas affected by the fighting. How are these people treated by Ukrainian authorities and the military?
It's really difficult for me to talk about this because I talk to the people themselves. And when they speak to me, they don't talk about politics or which side they support. They talk about their needs. They need the essentials. They're telling us what they need to survive. And what I can say is that they have hope for peace and for a better life for them and for their families.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us on DW News. That was Achille Dupre from the ICRC. Take care.